As a physical therapist, how confident are you coaching a deadlift? Do you know how to properly cue it so that your patient moves in the right trajectory? Do you know what types of patients are going to be better deadlifters compared to squatters? Well, in this video, I want to talk about 4 tips so that way the next time you coach a deadlift, you can do it confidently. The first step to a successful deadlift is to make sure that the patient has the proper awareness, specifically about their position. We first need to make sure that they are understanding how to move the pelvis in a stacked position under the rib cage. A lot of times patients are either too much here or too much here. So we need to help them find the center. Once they find the center, grab a box, use the wall, whatever you have, something to act as a reference. And all we're going to start to do is put one hand on the stomach, one hand on the back, and we're just cueing them to hinge back to touch the box. Having the hands in this position is going to allow them to understand when they're compensating and really feel a rotation, as well as feel a squat. If they're not doing the right motion, they're not going to touch the box. So build awareness, rib cage above the pelvis in a stacked position, then teach the patient how to hinge back. When they hinge back, they need to feel hamstrings. So every time they're going back, they're thinking 2 things. I need to feel the box. I need to feel my hamstrings. First, if they feel the box, that means that they actually hinged back and they didn't squat. And if they feel their hamstrings, then that means that they again hinged and didn't go through a squatting pattern. A squatting pattern is going to give you a lot more quad, a lot more knee. And so if they get into this position where they maybe even touch the box, but their knees are super far bent, just have them straighten their knees out until they feel hamstrings. This is the hinge that we're looking for. Now, when you put it all together, we have our hands here. We're hinging back, touch the box until you feel the hamstrings. Awareness is key to ensuring a successful deadlift. Next, we need to increase our awareness of the language that we use. When I say our, I mean us being the coach, the clinician. We need to really get in sync with the cues that we're using and start to really make sure that we are purposeful with our language. For example, a lot of times when we coach a deadlift, we'll sometimes use the cue squat down to the bar. But the problem with that is when you squat down to the bar, your patient will squat down to the bar. And so in this position, we have way too much knee flexion, and we're not actually hinging. So changing squat to the bar to hinge to the bar. Another analogy that you could use is to tell that patient to imagine they have both hands full of groceries and they're at the biggest dilemma of their day. Do they take 1 trip or 2 as they bring the groceries into the house? At this point in time, they recognize that everyone has to do it in 1 trip. That's the universal law. So in order to shut the door when the hands are filled with grocery bags, we need to push and hinge, push the door closed with our hips. If you try to squat the door closed, the door is not going to shut. So from an analogy perspective and putting it in terms they are familiar with, hands are filled with groceries, close the door with your hips. Next, we need to be familiar with our patient's patterns, aka what is their structure doing? Are they more anteriorly oriented with an anterior pelvic tilt, which is going to create a pelvis that's more open in the back, which results in a better deadlifting pattern? Or are you dealing with someone that has a posterior center of mass, is more closed down posteriorly, and squats better? This squatter is going to have a harder time deadlifting. So we need to recognize their natural biases and tendencies so that we're not forcing them into positions that they can't tolerate. So when we're dealing with those that squat well, if we're trying to get them to deadlift, we're probably going to need to implement some sort of modification. Maybe we need to raise the floor. Maybe they need more cueing. Maybe we need a different bar compared to a traditional deadlifting bar. All these things come into play, but they don't if you're not first aware of the pattern. Now, if you want to get really confident with those patterns, I have a whole course that goes into this. I'll leave it linked below. It's called the Clinical Coaching Foundations course, where you start to understand how to recognize patterns so that you can then appropriately give them the right exercises. This is key to getting your patient long-term success. Again, I'll leave that link below. Feel free to check that out. Lastly, we need to increase our awareness of movement compensations. When you are coaching a deadlift, do you know what is wrong or right? Ultimately, how you coach it and the goal of the exercise is what truly dictates that. But in general, do you know what you should be looking for and how to change it if you see that compensation occur? Now, by far, the number one compensation when it comes to a deadlift is when a patient squats it. How do you see this? You're going to see two motions instead of one. For example, two motions would be this: 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So if someone's doing that, they are telling you that they do not have the mobility to get down to the ground. And there's really no rule that says we have to deadlift from the floor. So in a scenario like this, the patient may need to raise the floor and deadlift off a raised floor for the time being until they learn how to own the position. Now, what you should see when someone has adequate mobility is to go down. They should feel the hamstrings, they hinge back, they take the slack out of the bar, and then there's one motion up and one motion back. They are continuously pushing up in one motion and continuously pushing back. So that's the difference between one motion and two. Next time you're coaching a deadlift, check to see, are you observing two motions or one?